our past away, and also and move forward. So I think that's really important.
I do too. Thank you. Thanks for that. Roberta?
Yeah, I think that nonprofits should take the opportunity, let's say in the next 6 months, to look at the way they're operating with a critical eye. And I think somebody alluded to it before, just because we've done it that way, we're still doing it this way. I think people need to take a look and say, well, maybe we're a little bit different now. We need to do things differently, and devote the time and the resources you need to make these changes. And again, reach out for assistance when you need assistance. But, it's time now to kind of reshape or reimagine, whatever the current word is, to make your organization stronger so that you can fulfill your mission, because that is what nonprofits do. And I know I have a passion for helping nonprofits. I've been in it for 17 years, and I think it's really important. So I think now's the time to really, look at what we're doing and see what we need to do differently.
And if I could add to that, I think that's terrific. Having the passion for what we do, understanding who are the constituents, who are we really helping. All of us in the not-for-profit industry could have spent our careers in the for-profit industry, and we chose to service a certain type of individual or community. Having that passion, appreciating who appreciates us, will help us have the agility, will help us have the resilience that we need to move on, to handle the struggles. And I think looking back and reflecting on what we've already accomplished is tremendous. The not-for-profit industry is filled with a very special group of resilient and passionate people just looking to make a difference. And in many respects, it's an industry that, we should take the lead of, that could help the world and actually create a bright future for everybody.
Well said. Well said. So if I had to pick, and I know Kay's there, which means we're running out of time, if I had to pick one thing that was really a theme through much of what everybody said today, is that notion of learning together. Whether it was Donna talking about learning from each other and learning together on a national political level, whether it's within our individual organizations and learning from people called clients, learning from people called staff, and learning from each other, those of us that are on the call. So with that in mind, thank you, everybody. I wish you all a healthy and safe Thanksgiving, and thanks for participating in the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great job, Dave.
Thanks. Kay?
Thank you so much to our last round of panelists. Appreciate your lively discussion. Before we move on to the next panel, again, we'd just love to reiterate all the functions on Zoom so our audience members can, submit any questions they need to or would like to. The Q&A button is at the bottom of your screen, so feel free to submit questions there and upvote any questions that are of interest. And you can also feel free to use the chat function also at the bottom of the screen, just to make sure you share them with all attendees and not just the panelists. And with that, I will introduce our third panel, Pivoting During a Pandemic, Lessons Learned. So our panelists who are joining us for this discussion are Michelle Yanche, Executive Director of Good Shepherd Services, Karin Kunstler Goldman, Assistant Attorney General at the New York State Attorney General's Charities Bureau, Lisa Burch, Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at the Family and Children's Association, Matthew Esterson, Partner at Marks Paneth LLP, John McIntosh, Managing Partner at Sea Change Capital Partners, and Jeffrey Sobel, Founder and President of Jeffrey Sobel Consulting LLC. With that, I'll leave this to you, Michelle. Appreciate everyone's time. Thanks.
Hi, thanks everyone. Thank you, Kay. As I'm sure the rest or other panels were, our panel had a practice run earlier in which we were invited to be able to just stay on and be able to listen to the former panels. And in doing so, we learned that many of the things that we were going to be tackling were already covered by some of the former panelists. So picking up from where the panel before ours left off, in talking about adaptability, we're going to be practicing adaptability in doing this panel right now. Maybe we should retitle it Pivoting During a Panel. But please, we're going to do our best not to cover ground that was already covered, but keep in mind that not all of us were able to participate in the earlier panels. And so there may be some duplication. Bear with us. And so we're each going to introduce ourselves, and then I'm going to ask my panelists, fellow panelists, after introducing themselves, to just give you all a snapshot of what pivoting during the pandemic has looked like for their own organizations, and where applicable for the clients, for their client organizations or individuals that they serve. I'm Michelle Yanchi. I'm Executive Director of Good Shepherd Services. And just very briefly, I think for Good Shepherd, these past 8 months were very much about pivoting. It was probably parallel tracks of keeping the trains moving while also pivoting to really partner with our colleagues, with community members, with our government partners, to really be part of the citywide response, and ultimately the relief and at some point recovery effort. And I know that really, I'm sure, is very much true for all of you who are in our audience listening today, and that really being clear about our mission and an understanding how to both be true to our mission but be flexible and adaptable with our mission in order to be responsive to the individuals and the communities and the city that we serve has been very much what it's been like for Good Shepherd. And with that, I'm going to ask each one of my fellow panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Karin.
Hi, good afternoon. The word pivot has been used a lot during this pandemic. And I was trying to think, how have we in the Attorney General's office pivoted? The Attorney General, as you know, is the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the state. We have many, many statutory responsibilities to the people of the state of New York. I'm in the Charities Bureau. We oversee charities. We investigate charities and we prosecute charities. But we see ourselves in a different way. And we didn't pivot to this way, but we have always thought that one of our roles in addition to oversight is to work with the nonprofit sector to help the sector while the sector is doing its good deeds. One of our primary responsibilities is to have a registry of charities. All charities, or most charities, that solicit contributions from New Yorkers and or hold charitable assets in New York have to register with us and file annual financial forms, and those get posted on the internet so that the world can see them. So what did we do with our registry? Well, something we've been working on for a long time is we now have an e-filing of registrations and e-filing of financial reports. And we've really beefed up our e-filing of financial reports. And how does that help charities? Well, the information is out there for people to see. It helps donors. It helps you as charitable organizations get your grants, which I understand are harder to get now. So that's one of our primary jobs. But we also do a lot of outreach, and I'm sort of in charge of the outreach program. And we reach out to any organization, first of all, that invites us to speak, because we want to get the word out that we're not there just to investigate charities and to sue them, but we're there to help. So when COVID started, we started to think about what can we do to help. Organizations still have to register and file with us. They still have to run their programs if they can. They still have to follow the not-for-profit corporation law. But we decided that there were some things that we could do. And the first question that came to us was, we're a not-for-profit organization. We've been working for X number of years. We have regular meetings. How are we going to have our meetings now, the meetings with our members, when the not-for-profit corporation law doesn't explicitly say you can have virtual meetings? So the first guidance document that we drafted was one that says, it's our position that you can have virtual meetings, that as long as you follow the rules, have minutes, have notice of the meetings, give people an opportunity to hear and be heard. And that was met with great reception. A lot of people felt much more relaxed about that, and that we did really early on. And then we decided, well, there's some other questions we're getting. People are looking at their assets and how can they use they're pivoting. They're not going to keep their emergency money in the bank. They have to reach into it and use it. And so we put out guidance about using assets, using restricted assets, and we've gotten applications from organizations that say now it's time to dig into our restricted assets, and our approval has to go along with that. But we're working with organizations that want to do that. We have eased up a couple of the requirements. Financial reporting was the first thing. Immediately we got questions about that. My financial report is due. We can't even get our papers to our accountants. They're in a shopping bag. So we said, okay, and there are small organizations who do that, and that's the way they operate, and we understand that. So we gave another 6-month extension to those organizations for their 2019 filing so that they didn't have to worry about that. And then we were asked by organizations about what should we do? Should an organization dissolve? Should we merge with another organization? And last Friday, we held a virtual symposium on just that topic, and we're going to hold more because people are asking for them. So I'm not sure that pivoting is the right word for us. We're doing the same thing we always do, but we're doing more of it, and we're doing more targeted outreach and just focusing on COVID. And we know that all of you make our lives so much better, and we feel that I know we're the government, but we feel and we hope that we're part of that as well to help you along.
Thanks, Karin. Lisa, you're up.
Hi, my name is Lisa Burch. I am the Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at FCA. For those of you not familiar with FCA, we are a 136-year-old social service organization, which means that COVID was not our first pandemic. We have been in existence through the 1918 flu pandemic and H1N1, 9/11, Sandy. We've weathered a number of crises, and we are really proud to say that, during none of those and during this time, we never closed our doors. We were able to continue operating and providing the services to the communities that we serve. We are a Long Island-based organization. We focus mostly on Nassau County, but we also have some services in Suffolk County. And our services really range from a co-op nursery program in the village of Hempstead to a suite of senior services that we provide. We also have mental health, drug treatment, residential, and prevention services. So we serve about 30,000 people a year. We have over 350 full and part-time employees. And I think that for us, during this most recent pandemic, pivoting really meant being able to balance our ability to continue providing services to these communities that rely on us, but also being able to meet the needs of our staff, many of whom are, single parents with young kids and, or seniors. We have a lot of staff who are seniors themselves and are in a higher risk profile. So learning how to balance that and be able to continue day-to-day operations was really key for us. And I'll let somebody else introduce themselves. I'll talk more about that after.
Thank you, Lisa. Matthew, you're next.
Thanks, Michelle. Good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Matt Esterson. I'm an audit partner in the nonprofit government and healthcare group at Marks Paneth. Thank you for including us today. Marks Paneth's a full-service accounting firm with a large nonprofit practice, and I work with human service agencies, advocacy organizations, schools, foundations, cultural institutions, kind of a good range across the industry. I also volunteer on the boards of 2 nonprofits, one of whom I actually met at a NYN media event a couple of years ago. So we've really helped with pivoting in a few major ways. The first, and thinking back to kind of early days in March, was technology and systems related. So as everybody transitioned to remote work, we had lots of discussions. First, how to change processes just so operations could continue, and also how could organizations still meet the internal control objectives and compliance objectives that everybody had set out pre-COVID in a new environment. And, as you'd expect, and as I think you've heard from others today, we've just seen a kind of a constant increase in the pace of adoption of technology. A second major focus has been navigating the various relief programs that have been out there, the related accounting for them, and then importantly, the integration between those programs and existing funding. And that can be highly technical, it's organization specific, but it's extremely important, particularly for anybody who has government funding. There's some kind of complex interactions between the different relief programs. And then a final area that we've worked in is some advisory work around the future, including due diligence on potential partnerships, strategic affiliations, mergers and consolidations, as kind of Karin was speaking about. And I'd expect that to increase over the next few years. And again, thank you. I'm happy for the opportunity to be speaking here today.
Thanks, Matthew. John, you're next.
Hi, everybody. So I'm John McIntosh, and I'm a partner at a nonprofit called Sea Change Capital Partners. Our mission is to champion or support nonprofits that are facing complex financial and organizational challenges. So as you can imagine, we've been pretty busy this year. And if I just sort of give you the 2-minute history of what the year has been, I think it sort of tells you what we see in the market. So I think after the crisis hit, we wrote some reports, which we usually don't do. I hate reports. I feel like there are enough reports in the world. Why add to it? But we felt there were some things worth saying on 2 fronts. One is, how did we see the best organizations deal with the crisis when it first emerged? And the short story is, and I can send a link to the report, refocus on the mission, conserve cash, get tough. And then the second report was really, how can funders perhaps change the way they operate to help not-for-profits? And there were some simple things like remove your restrictions, make your support general operating, but also really an argument that funders needed to work hard to help organizations do things like explore mergers, divest programs, sell buildings, et cetera, because that sort of stuff is important in this environment. One of the ways we help nonprofits is through lending. So we have a loan book out there, and we immediately accrued or waived or deferred all of the interest. We felt, in March, April, May, June, people shouldn't be sending us interest because God knows what the future would bring. So we did that. Then we wrote a couple of reports arguing that the government should help in different ways the larger not-for-profits. I think the smaller not-profits, like Sea Change, get a lot of attention, as we should. But what I think people don't realize, as I'm sure Lisa and Karin and others know, is that the majority of the work is done by groups that are really quite large. And those groups were basically excluded from PPP and some of the other programs. So we tried to lobby alongside Michelle and others to get that done. And then I guess the 2 things I would say is, one of the ways we help nonprofits is by making grants to allow them to explore, and if it makes sense, and only if it makes sense to complete mergers, joint ventures, and other types of deep collaboration. I thought that activity would be just absolutely dead. That boards and executive directors would say, in this environment, how can we possibly be thinking about something like a merger? I was completely wrong. That's exactly backwards. I think what we're seeing now is groups that are fine now, in fact, they're probably relatively strong, still recognize that it could be a really long slog. 2021, 2022, 2023, who knows where the city and state finances are? Who knows where the market's going? Who knows what the new administration can and can't do? And so we're seeing a lot of conversations between relatively strong groups who are finally saying, let's not let little things like nostalgia, history, emotion, ego, the narcissism of small differences get in the way. We should really see if there's a way to be even stronger. And then finally, as PPP has run out, our restructuring activity, perhaps sadly, is getting pretty busy. I think that there are groups that got PPP, but that money is gone and they're in a pickle again. There were these emergency grant funds that we participated in, but I think those were one and done. And so, just in the last month, we're starting to get more phone calls from executive directors and board members sometimes sort of saying, it's like old Mother Hubbard, we've gone to the cupboard and the cupboard is bare. And we're helping where we can, but it's a tough situation, particularly for groups that have facilities, YMCAs, arts and culture, places where they're still closed. And it's very hard to hunker down and really get your costs close to zero because you've got a building that eats money. So that's what we've been up to. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, John. I'm just going to round out the introductions.
So my name is Jeff Sobel, and I'm the president of Jeffrey Sobel Consulting. And thank you for having us, and we're happy to be part of the panel. We're a firm that a little bit like some of the other people I talked about, we're really focused on overall health and the overall growth in regards to the nonprofit space and working with our clients to really think about really what they are thinking about vision-wise for us and understanding your vision and where you want to go, even in the pandemic and COVID, understanding that may have sort of thrown a monkey wrench in sort of where you're going, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't be still striving toward those visions. I would say our biggest focus, or clients mostly that we work is the biggest space is development and fundraising, and really helping organizations attract new revenues and really sort of think through how they can handle that. I would say, given the pandemic, for us, the biggest change was really actually getting groups to really go back to what we would call best practice fundraising, and not really hide behind technology as well as events, but use those technologies to allow you to have conversations with your best supporters, whether that's a foundation, whether that's a corporation, or major gift donors. Obviously, lots of organizations were unable to do events and galas and all that, but they pivoted very quickly. We helped lots and lots of groups do virtual events. I'm sure many of you attended many of these and sort of participated in a variety of these. And for a lot of our groups actually netted more dollars than they ever had before because they didn't have the expense of a fancy hotel or some other, other aspects, the way they manage a golf outing or something like that. But to be honest with you, I think for us, the biggest thing or the biggest change that we saw a lot of organizations decide, I really have to steward the individuals that are our best supporters. And what we found is lots of people, once they did that, those supporters, whether, again, foundations, companies, individuals, they reacted in an extremely positive way. They stepped forward and really supported these organizations in really positive ways. So from that perspective, we felt, not that I would never say that this particular moment in time is a great moment in time for us, but in some aspects, it really helped us forward and get people thinking in a certain way. The other thing that I think came to the forefront for us is, and we think, for us COVID. We've been working slowly in building out social impact and social investing opportunities, working with nonprofits to think through that and how to best take advantage of that. I personally think going forward, it's going to be one of our best opportunities to think about the nonprofit space and the impact that we can have, whether they're small organizations, big organizations, or really more important, partnerships among nonprofits. So we're working with a few clients currently to think through some bigger aspects, especially in the homeless space and in dealing with housing the homeless, really in a permanent space, affordable housing. Housing is an area that I think will really benefit from impact investing. Our biggest piece that we're working on during this time frame is to try to educate the nonprofit space in regards to impact investing. What does that truly mean? Is it something that you should be thinking about? There's an enormous amount of money being put in impact investing, but to me, I'd rather see this sort of effort more led by the nonprofit space than being led by the investors, or at least a combination. Right now, the investors are dictating, and really we need the nonprofit space to be dictating when it comes to social investment. So I'm hoping that this moment in time, the biggest thing I can see is that government is going to really be hurting. All the governments. We're on both sides of the river. We work with clients in New York and New Jersey, and we're seeing these budgets being decimated. And some of the social impact investing could be really creative ways for cities, counties, and states and municipalities to really think about how they tackle some of this stuff by bringing investors to the table and sort of furthering out their responsibility dollar-wise to many years down the road, so that we can work through these budgets in a more positive way. So we're hoping to sort of integrate some of those in some of our work. So I'll turn it back over to Michelle.
Thanks, Jeff. So we as I said, we had a plan for this, but we're pivoting. So I'm just going to throw out one sort of overarching question to ask each of the panelists, or any of the panelists to answer. I'll be starting off with Lisa, and the others can fight each other. Whoever gets to their unmute button first wins. And just in the lead up to this, for myself, I've been thinking a lot about what the experience was after Superstorm Sandy. And we all spent a lot of time working on disaster preparedness plans and being part of those conversations. And when COVID first hit back in the spring, we pulled out our disaster preparedness plan and discovered, unfortunately, that it prepared us for another weather crisis and not a health crisis. And so, but one thing that is similar about these experiences from my perspective at Good Shepherd as a human service provider was just that the way in which the nonprofit network is the boots on the ground, the secret weapon, I would say, for New York in being able to pivot and be responsive to community needs as part of that emergency response effort. And when we were doing our preps session, Lisa really articulated that as I'm taking her phrase of sort of we as boots on the ground. And so for each person, starting with Lisa, what's gone well and what's maybe not gone so well, and how should that inform our lessons learning, because we're still in this, right? This is ongoing. We're not yet on the other side. So what should we be using to inform this next phase that we're entering into, or that we're already in, I guess, and then in particular the new normal when we get there?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. I kind of come to hate that phrase, the new normal, right? I mean, everyone's using it now. I don't even really know what it means because nothing's normal and it's all new. But I would say at FCA, one of the things that worked for us was constant communication. And I know that a lot of people got Zoom weary pretty quickly. But for us, we had nearly daily phone calls or Teams calls or Zoom calls with all of our leadership group. We stayed in constant contact. We were able to have like an all staff Zoom call very early on where we reassured people about what was happening and how we were handling things, and that people's jobs, for the most part, were secure. We were fortunate that we really only had to furlough just a couple of people. We were able to maintain people's positions. And I think that's also because another thing that worked really well for us was when we talk about pivoting, we were able to pivot very quickly to providing services in a tele fashion. So we do drug treatment counseling, and we do mental health services and family work, prevention work. We were able to very quickly move to platforms that we already had in place somewhat, but we were able to ramp that up really quickly so that we really didn't miss a beat when it came to services. It was tricky getting some of our clients to understand how to utilize online platforms and Zoom and Teams and things like that. But once we did, we were able to continue to engage and really innovate. And we did things like we serve seniors in Nassau County. And as you know, those are the folks who have really been significantly disenfranchised by COVID. Social isolation has been an issue for many of the seniors we serve. So we were able to start doing like weekly chats with seniors, and we kind of worked with some of them to teach them how to get on to Zoom. They did great. And it was a way to connect people to people, and that was really helpful. We also, I think are fortunate that we have a staff who, at the drop of a hat, will just take on any role. Really, honestly, it's amazing to me how flexible people have been, not only about working from home or coming onto a site, but about taking on new roles. We realized early on that the immigrant community on Long Island was also being affected by COVID in disproportionate ways, and weren't able to avail themselves of some services, mostly because of language barriers, but also because of a fear that coming forward would cause problems for them that they didn't want to deal with. So we created an immigrant helpline within about 4 days. We were able to work with our IT provider. Everybody had their phones, transferred over to their cell phones. They were answering calls. We set up a helpline. We put the word out. We had 60 calls in the first 2 days, and the calls haven't stopped. We've continued that helpline, and we've been able to help numerous families receive services and link them to services that they might not otherwise have had. So, so for us, again, flexibility, communication, being innovative, just to speak a little bit to kind of what didn't work. I think working virtually and remotely has its pluses. I, for one, loved working in my pajamas. It was wonderful. But after a while, those of us who work in the human service field, we got into this field for a reason, right? We like people generally, right? And we also found out that we work better together. And so sometimes there are things that you can't do virtually. And sometimes you need to be able to walk down the hall and see somebody, or, go into somebody's office and talk to them, or, huddle together that a Teams call or emails can't really do. So, we had to figure out, again, what that balance was in terms of staying virtual, staying safe, but also getting people to come back on site in a safe way, and being able to let clients come back into our clinics and our offices to receive services. PPE was not something any of us ever thought about, right? Who thought about masks? Now we have masks to match every outfit. But we didn't think about having to have hand sanitizer and all of those things. But again, we had to very quickly get our physical locations ready to get people back on site, having the proper PPE. Government was great in that respect, working with government, our local legislators and other folks, emergency preparedness, they provided us with a lot of what we needed. But, you know, government also was our friend in the beginning, and, you know, don't worry, do what you need. Everybody's fine. We'll work together. And then all of a sudden, at some point it shifted and it was like, well, you got a PPP loan, so you really don't need our money, right? And, you know, we were like, no, that's not right. We need it because, you know, $2 million in revenue that we thought we'd have from fundraising is gone in the blink of an eye. So, you know, so balancing out again, you know, the partnership with our government and our funders. I don't want to take up too many time because I know everybody else has something to say, but that's what I would say: flexibility, balance, communication. Those are some of the lessons that we learned to help inform how we're going to do this when things get worse, if and when they do.
Thanks, Lisa. Everyone doesn't need to answer the same question, but if you have a compelling contribution to make, jump in. I think, Jeff, you wanted to say something on this, so we can make sure we leave some time for question at the end.
Yeah, no, I just had a very quick thing. I didn't want to double on all the things. Lisa said some great things, but one thing that we found, especially smaller organizations, we felt during this piece, what really happened was there's a lot of better procedures and dialogue that happened between staff and board. Board members really understood that, hey, I've got to step forward. I got to really play a role in this, but also don't hamper the staff's ability to do things. And so we found in this piece that staff and board members really found a good way to communicate and figure out how to make decisions, especially fiduciary decisions. And that sometimes can be a real difficult thing in normal time. I hate to use the word normal times, but normal times, that's a hard thing for small organizations. It takes months to make certain decisions. And they didn't have that time to do it, so they figured it out and did it. And so I just commend a lot of organizations. The second point I would make is we felt a lot of organizations felt like they needed to dive into certain places they had never done before. We had education institutions who felt like they needed to start feeding families because they didn't have kids in the classroom anymore, but they knew that parents had needs or other operations. And we found very quickly that they said, in swimming in waters they had never swam before, they reached out and connected to other organizations, and groups just started collaborating and partnering in great ways. So, you know, that's one thing I would always say. You know, you as an organization, when you think that you're going to be able to think and engage the community, there's always people out there doing or thinking what you are, and it's always best to collaborate and think how to partner together on that versus just diving out there and doing it on your own. So.
Thanks, Jeff. Anyone else want to add anything, or can we move to the questions?
Well, I just want to say one thing about my office, because I was there with 9/11. I was there with Sandy, and what did we do? We reached out to try to organize charitable organizations that were getting more money than they'd ever gotten. And how do you provide services when you don't have any experience and you've got 6 times the amount of money? And we work with them together. We work with the organizing charities after 9/11 so that people wouldn't get two mortgage payments and someone got none. And this is the flip side. Here are organizations whose revenues are plummeting. And, you know, maybe in a sense we pivoted and we decided that we've got to reach out to how can we make it easier for organizations to interact with us? How can we provide guidance for them? We can't represent organizations, but we can provide guidance. We can provide referrals. We have, you know, we know people in service organizations that help not-for-profits. We post resources. So it was the opposite of what we did during those disasters. And this was, you know, a disaster that still has very, very different consequences.
Thank you, Karen. We're gonna move over to the questions now, and I want to pick up on the theme of a question asked by David. One of his questions in the Q&A, and also while we're doing this, invite others if you have questions to please throw them out at us. Along the lines of, so I'll read the exact question. It's disaster preparedness and business continuity planning must always include the unimaginable. How will we change our planning now so that we know we really cannot, now that we know that we really can't anticipate the next crisis? And I just want to twist it a little bit to say, to name the reality that we can't know the unimaginable. None of us could have ever, even if we had spent, days brainstorming, we wouldn't have necessarily come up with this particular scenario. And so planning alone probably isn't enough. In addition to things like understanding how to do disaster preparedness or business continuity work, maybe what are some of the capacities and muscles that organizations need to strengthen in order to be able to be to respond and pivot with whatever comes. I've been thinking about that video game where like the little guy runs along and jumps the barrels, right? You just don't know what's coming. So John, I hope you're reaching for your unmute button, because I'm gonna toss this to you.
Thanks, Michelle. We wrote a report 4 or 5 years ago with the scintillating title "Risk Management for Nonprofits in the Wake of FEGS." And so we've given a lot of thought to this. And I guess I'd make 2 points. If you talk to many of the strategic planning firms, like the Bridgespans of the world, a lot of their business now has been reframed as sort of scenario planning or risk management. So picking up from your point, Michelle, rather than sort of saying, let's predict the future, more say, what are the range of things reasonably that might happen? And let's not try to guess which one it's going to be, because no one knows. Tell me when the vaccine's going to come. Tell me what Biden's going to be able to do for the city or state. Like, let's not try to predict the future. Let's think about the range and be ready. And from my perspective, being ready is really 2 things, and we've seen it. It's reserves and relationships. That if you don't have any reserves, then you have almost no time. And how do you deal with an uncertain world? So like really committing before the next disaster comes to trying by hook or by crook to build your reserves so you have a little sort of margin for error, a little cushion of time to figure things out. And relationships, I think, relationships between staff and board, relationships with funders, which doesn't mean they'll continue to give money when COVID-2 comes, but maybe they'll tell you early what's going on. Like I just sort of am struck by, if you have some reserves and you have good relationships, that's probably the best you can do in an uncertain world. That's how we see it.
If I could piggyback on that, because John, I think it's interesting that you bring up FEGS. I think one of the lessons from FEGS is internal financial reporting, particularly to the board and audit committees and finance committees about the liquidity on the balance sheet. There's actually changes in standards and new disclosures on liquidity that were really as a direct result. But it's kind of the typical accountant answer, Michelle, to the overall question is never underestimate the importance of a strong balance sheet, and that board members, senior management, everybody should be aware of how many months of liquid assets you have on hand, how that fluctuates throughout the year, and what are the stress points, because it's the nature of the disaster will change. But one of the things that is John really said is that that liquidity brings flexibility, and is something that should be in every single internal financial report that gets shared and spoken about throughout the year.
Right. I would just add to that, make sure you really convey that to donors. We have for years have been doing growth and sustainability campaigns, and every one of them has included a percentage of contributions going to reserves. And actually, to be honest with you, major donors love that. You know, a lot of people in nonprofit think, oh, how could I tell a $100,000 donor that I'm going to stick 20 of it in a reserve? They actually like it. They're conservative people, they're financial people, they understand running a business, and they understand you need a reserve. So don't run away from the issue. Talk to your donors and let them know if they give a little bit more, you're going to stick some of it away for a rainy day or a pandemic. So don't run away from the issue. So
I just want to add, just from my own experience with Good Shepherd Services, and we're a large organization. Our normal times budget is about 100 million. And I will just say, I really want to emphasize what Matthew and John had to say. For us, cash and having a lot of internal strength around scenario planning were probably two of the greatest assets that we had. And on that, I just really feel I want to give a shout out to our government partners and our and those in the funder community who were really responsive at the very beginning. And a couple of things really made a difference. One was with our government partners. The city in particular made a decision early on to stop recoupment, which was the process, to oversimplify, the process by which cash advances from the previous July would start to be recouped. And so that alone made a big difference. And then in addition to that, to start pushing out additional advances. I think that made a huge difference for Good Shepherd. I'm sure that's true for other city funded organizations. And then cost sharing, cost and risk sharing, those decisions made, relatively early on make a difference for us to be able to take risks, to be responsive, to know that our government partners are going to share both the risks and the expense with us. So those kinds of commitments make a difference. And the faster they come, the more of a difference and impact they make. And then for our philanthropy partners, converting to unrestricted funds, that was a big deal. I had a little a memo pad where I was keeping track of what funds were being converted to unrestricted that I knew I could use flexibly. That made me better able to be responsive and therefore also Good Shepherd. So John wants to add just one more thing.
I would just say one of the things I hope that let's face it, if you were trying to imagine three kinds of people who don't really understand how precious cash is, you would put a foundation executive, a government bureaucrat, okay, and a Fortune 500 type, right? So if the normal people we dealt with were small businessmen, or they owned restaurants, or they were, I don't know, they built a plumbing company, they would know about cash. But the people who sit on our boards, the people who normally man the phones at the city and state and foundations, work for entities where cash is never an issue. And so what I think we need to do is never let them forget what they've learned in this crisis, which is cash is really a big issue for even the best nonprofits, and work hard to try to make permanent the things they've done under duress, because otherwise they're going to forget again. That was rude, I'm sorry, but it's true.
Thanks. I was just about to be Zoom bombed by one of my kids. Such as work in the pandemic. I want to get to another question that was in the Q&A, and that was really around technology. John, when you spoke first, you talked about COVID-2, which was that we're not excited about the idea of a 2.0 version of this experience, but it is likely to happen, and so we, the big surprise, I guess, for me at least, of my generation in this moment was how important technology was, and all of the ways in which things that I thought we couldn't do possibly. Even Zoom meetings suddenly became the norm. And then, of course, related to health mitigation of risk specifically. So one of the questions is, given the fact that we could be facing this for a while more, and then again in the future, should we, what's the value for nonprofits in investing in technology? technology related to temperature scanning, desk scheduling, social distance monitoring, contact tracing, or other technological systems. Anybody want to tackle that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in just quickly and say, you know, obviously this is something that we have had to address. You know, we're looking right now at those temperature things that you put on the wall so that when somebody walks in, it automatically takes their temperature because people don't want to get close enough with the handheld one. You know, we had to get all of the signage that you have to put all over every location that tells people to keep their distance. We also sold our building, our main office building, during the pandemic, and are in the process of moving to a new location. So with doing all of that and putting people in cubicles and in open spaces, there's been a lot of discussion about, you know, those plexiglass sneeze guards and things like that. But from a technology point of view, I don't think that, you know, I could not overemphasize this enough, that, you know, technology for nonprofits always falls to the bottom of the pile when doing budgets. At least that's been my experience, right? So you have to pay for your staff and you have to pay for your locations and your client activities and all that. And then at the end of the year, if there's a little money left over, maybe you invest it and you buy some new laptops. That's a situation that, you know, that really needs to change. I think nonprofits need to be a little more proactive in making sure that our equipment is up to date. I mean, we all have tablets. I'm on a tablet right now, but my computer at my desk, I couldn't do this there because I don't have a camera or a microphone. And most people didn't. So we had to invest in laptops and tablets for everybody, especially those people who are going to be doing telehealth. I think that, you know, having a good a network provider or somebody that you can rely on, like we do, is invaluable, because you need to be able to change things and get people's phones going and find out why the network's down. Otherwise, you miss billing, you know, in the snap of a finger. So I really think that this is one of those times where we can't move forward and forget where we were pre-COVID in terms of our technology and our organizations.
And we're also seeing at our firm, not just specific to COVID, things like temperature scanning or that are specific to this crisis, but we've been seeing for years kind of a trend towards enterprise-wide technology systems. So we have a technology services group that does, you know, implements data analytics and kind of other tools that help in overall operational efficiency. So you could think about a healthcare provider that can implement different metrics that automatically scan for kind of effectiveness of medical billing and kind of other different dashboard measures that pop out right to a leadership team and say, hey, this is how our programs are actually running. And so I know that for a lot of, you know, that can be daunting for smaller organizations to think about, but it's becoming more accessible and I think more and more important to just kind of good governance and everyday operations. So COVID's definitely accelerating that trend, but it's something that has you know, been advancing for years now. And I think that particularly mid-sized and large organizations, that there's always organizational-wide opportunities to adopt some useful software and change things on a more global perspective than really that are just specific to any kind of current threat.
I think, Beth, there was a question in the chat about flexibility of funding, and I would even broaden it to be really more flexibility in general, recognizing how important flexibility of resources and flexibility in terms of relief from ordinary restrictions, regulations, et cetera, may make a difference in a crisis. you could argue would make a difference in the new normal or in any scenario to improve outcomes and impact. And so question is, what can we be doing as an industry to encourage increased flexibility of resources and beyond that?
Yeah,
Anyone want to tackle that?
I'll just jump
Jeff,
in real
go ahead.
quick. I'm actually gonna, I'll maybe sort of serve this up for John a little bit, but John said he hates writing reports, but to be honest with you, the more that we can document how this flexibility has helped us and changed the abilities for organizations to do that and get that information to funders, get that to those key decision makers, those people, those program officers, major donors, different people. So starting to communicate that type of information and going forward about how that helps you as an organization and will help you achieve what you're going to do in the future. I think that's really just, it's just best practice, just going back to best practices. And program officers, I hate to say it, are still people too, and they will react well to it. So.
John, Karin, and any thoughts on that? In particular, Karin, related to the interface between nonprofit organizations and funders.
There's just one last thing I forgot to add in there, Michelle, is, also in this reporting and thinking back as you communicate back to donors, think about communicating what I would call gap funding. What's the gap between where you are today versus where you need to get to, and communicating that need. A lot of organizations don't put that in their proposals, don't communicate that in their stewardship. We're here, but we're not really totally to where we need to be, and it's going to cost our organization X. Really quantifying is important for donors and foundations to react to. They're not going to give you all of it, but they'll give you some of it, and then they'll help you move toward to achieving that gap. So quantify what that gap is and what you need in flexibility so that they can react to it. So.
Yeah, and what we hear often from organizations with regard to funding is that there are certain things that our funders won't cover. And we can't have our programs if we don't have overhead. And listening to this discussion, might it not be wise for funders to think about preparedness and restrict a certain portion of their funding to preparedness? That I don't know if anybody's thinking about that and how boards of directors or foundations would think about that. I think I know how government funders might think about that, but how are organizations going to be prepared for the next round, if heaven forbid that there is a next round, unless funders are behind that and funders are realistic about our society and what's happening to it. And that isn't anything that we can do anything about. We talk about it. We talk about prompt contracting, and we talk about overhead, but we don't have control of those issues.
Yeah,
I just really, I would just want to connect the dots between what Jeff and Karin both have said is really also around the importance of those things that overhead funds, right? The words are never very appealing, right? Overhead, indirect, administrative, doesn't sound as great as a program, right? But the reality to me is like, and John, this is, we're putting reports on your plate, is to really be able to document and show how it was exactly for Good Shepherd and for so many of my colleagues, it was exactly the core functions that those resources support that became pivotal in a crisis, in particular in this crisis for us, right? Our technology team, our finance department, facilities and maintenance. I mean, our facilities and maintenance teams became our MVPs in this health crisis. And so having those teams who were strong and really experts in what they do, to be able to redeploy them to this challenge, I mean, that was a game changer. And that's what overhead, indirect, that's what that supports. And it's about putting the face to that in a better way.
Yeah. and
Sorry, Lisa.
I would just, I would add to that too. It's, as we struggle every day to cover our overhead and our indirect. We have funders who just won't pay for it at all. So all they pay for are the direct program services, which they think is wonderful, but then they want all of their fiscal reports and they want all their HR reports and they want the facilities to stay clean and all of those things that they won't pay for. So what do we do as an organization and others? We fundraise. And then we use those fundraise dollars to help pay for things like human resources and facilities management and finance. It's not sustainable. It's not sustainable at all. And, some organizations, FCA being one of them, have really started to say to funders when we apply for funding, we won't do this if you won't cover overhead. It's a tough stance to take, but it needs to be done. And I think to the funders out there, if there are funders and foundation folks listening, I would say, hear our plea, really, because it's getting near impossible to continue to operate and to provide these valuable services without having the dollars. And then when you look at something like a COVID or a pandemic or something that happens, and now all the funding is directed just toward that. So now you can't even use any of that money to pay for your overhead because they just wanted to cover COVID related expenses. And, it just becomes a game that, a lot of us who've been doing this for a long time are, getting a little tired of playing, but, we keep doing it because it's the only way we do business, but it's not a good way to function.
John, did you want to add something?
I would say here, I'm actually a little sympathetic that I think that if you kind of said, like, everything's going to stay the same, but please give us more money and make it more flexible, that's a bit of a tough one. I think what we really need is the new mayor on the city side and some philanthropic leaders to kind of say, look, you've got these legitimate concerns. You're still in the 70s. You're worried about procurement issues. You're worried about a dollar going the wrong way, even if it's a dollar. How can we solve those issues while giving nonprofits cash up front and some flexibility? And ditto, okay, here you're a foundation, you love Good Shepherd, but your mission is only the Bronx. So how can you find some way to support the organization in the area that overlaps with your mission, whilst, just sort of think of this more as a sort of collective problem solving exercise that may require sort of new mechanisms rather than just asking for more and more flexibility. Because I just feel like, I've only been in this business for 12 years, but we've been talking about that for 12 years and it hasn't been a winner. But maybe sort of approaching it that both sides have legitimate issues and concerns, and can we creatively sort of solve the problem? I've always felt, and people hate this, that we probably need to develop mechanisms that are different for some of the larger high capacity organizations than for the vast majority of the organizations out there, which are really sort of quite small. But people in the nonprofit sector hate that. We all want to view ourselves as sort of all for one and one for all. So I think it's tough, but I do hope that the new mayor will convene a creative group of problem solvers to see if we can sort of reimagine the relationship in a way that gives both the city and nonprofits what they need. And maybe, a philanthropic leader like a Darren Walker or whatever can try to do that on the foundation side, because I think it calls for some creativity.
Right. I'd just jump in there real, because I think there's a real, without getting into details, because it's going to be very complicated, but there's a way for government, nonprofits, and private funders to really be in partnership together and can solve these issues and do it with big dollars and do it in a way that helps the government say, hey, we're going to spend the tax dollar wisely. and we're going to back an enormous amount of money, kind of like what Darren's doing at Ford, right? They're moving into bond, they're moving in the investment way, they're doing less grants and they're doing more investing, right? And your nonprofits are saying, hey, we'll take a contract on society and we're going to impact in big sweeping ways, but we need the capital and we need it flexible. And people who usually can give that are individuals and family offices. So we just have to find creative ways to bring everybody together and do it so that, people like Lisa can do it on the ground and make it happen. So, but we'll get there. We'll do it.
I need to.
We're at the end of our time because Kay has appeared.
Yes, thank you so much to our last round of panelists and all the other speakers who have joined us today for this event. And thank you to our audience for coming in and listening to our wonderful speakers. And thank you again also to our sponsors, Mazars USA, Citron Cooperman, Grassi Accountants and Advisors, Jeffrey Sobel Consulting, Lockton Companies, Marks Paneth Accountants and Advisors, Paymerang, Revis Page Jump, Roberta Katz Consulting, and Bushbinder. And please feel free to check the chat. We have some more upcoming events on December 3rd, which is our next installment of our AAP webinar series, and on the 8th for our Transportation in New York webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today.